War. War never changes. Or at least that's what COD said, I think. Wait, no, that was Fallout 4. Okay, look, when I played Fallout 4, I skipped the opening cutscene, and I've never touched a Call of Duty game in my life because, being their first child, my parents were really strict with what I did online. And when they got off my asses for it, and I wanted to play the Call of Duty games, let's just say they weren't in the best state. Though with some of the shit that's online, I actually thank them for looking out for me in some way. I mean, just look at the shit my younger brother watches. Like, what the f? However, one thing my parents definitely didn't restrict, though, was music for some reason. My mom was having me listen to stuff like Baby Got Back by the age of 5, and then my dad even had this CD that contained lullaby renditions of Rush songs, which I still have today. Anyway, with that epic music taste that my parents passed down to me, it definitely leads me down some rabbit holes. Like when I randomly came across I Come Blood by Cannibal Corpse on a YouTube playlist when I was 10 and didn't know what that word meant, thinking it was just a misspelling with a sprinkle of bad grammar on top. One of these other rabbit holes is the subject of today's video, as you see. During the early days of the pandemic, when I was a depressed preteen, I stumbled upon a treasure trove of history, good music, and guitar riffs that sound a lot easier than they actually are. Sabaton. If you've seen some of my previous videos, then you can tell that my two big things are history and music. Well, that and gory horror films, but that's besides the point. So what is a Sabaton? Well, Sabaton is a power metal band from the land of Minecraft and Ikea, Sweden, made up the current members lead singer Joakim Brodin, bassist Per Sundström, lead guitarist Chris Rorland, other lead guitarist Throb Unglund, and least but still Swedish of them all, drummer Hans van Dahl. That line was a first take, by the way. Anyway, they were formed in 1999 when a few guys came together in an old schoolhouse literally called Valhalla. The Nordic stereotype jokes write themselves, and decided to write music. Apparently, they were all big fucking nerds who decided to make music about history. Then, even named their band after a knight's foot. I'm not even kidding. According to the Sabaton website, a Sabaton is a flexible steel foot covering in a medieval suit of armor. The band's logo is even made to represent the armor piece and changes color depending on what the band feels like slapping on an album cover. I don't know if they named it that because they actually liked history or because Joakim has a foot fetish. I mean, we're talking about the guy who has a habit of swinging overinflated rubbers around on stage, so my theory is not that far of a stretch. I'm on to you, you bald Lemmy. I'm on to you. Then they played music in Sweden, then Europe, and became a famous band, blah blah blah. Honestly, instead of talking about the history of the band, I'd much rather look into the history their songs teach. One, because it's a lot cooler, and two, that means I get to put a bunch of important looking documents and old poetry in my sources to make myself look much smarter. Because of that, the rest of this video is going to be my thoughts on the band and what their accomplishments are and crap, while going on a side rant about some battle that happened in France 100 years ago, or some short man from Texas who may be a man of the wild. Reference! I cannot stop my praises of this band and their music. Through both their charming nature and their honestly creative way of telling stories through music, they have become one of my favorite bands, if not my favorite band. It is my opinion that history is a criminally neglected medium in music. Like, what's the last time apart from Sabaton where there's been a song about a major event in history? Okay, well besides those, what? There are so many stories and tales that are left forgotten that would make for a killer metal song a few millennia after it was first recorded. Not only would it make bank for the musician, as song lyrics are pretty much already written for them, but it could get the youths into history as well, which from experience in 1.5 hour long classes can seem a bit boring to those consumers. Because of that fact, I praise this band for tapping into this medium more than it had been and showing the world that it is not, in fact, boring. At least some of it. Another thing I like about them is how they pay attention to individual people and their stories, at least trying to give the reader a more grounded and personal experience, allowing them to relate to it more. The best example of this is their song To Hell and Back, a song about the famous actor Audie Murphy and his unpleasurable experience. After the war, he had a lot of trouble with PTSD and thus had to take pills to calm him down. However, he got really addicted to the medication, and to overcome that addiction, locked himself in a motel room for a week straight to try and overcome that addiction. The song goes over his experience and how he has flashbacks to his time in Italy fighting the No-No Germans. This is one of their better written lyrically songs, bringing in the lines from Murphy's own poem, The Crosses Grow on Anzio. It goes something like, "Oh, gather round me, comrades, and listen while I speak of a war, a war, a war, where hell is 6 feet deep. Along the shore, the cannons roar. Oh, how can a soldier sleep? The going's slow on Anzio, and hell is 6 feet deep. Praise be to God for this captured sod that rich with blood does seep. With yours and mine like butchered swines, and hell is 6 feet deep. That death awaits, there's no debate, no triumph will we reap. The crosses grow on Anzio, where hell is 6 feet deep." This, as it suggests, is about Murphy's time fighting near the town of Anzio. No shit. But the reason I like this song is that it doesn't talk about the war and fighting itself, no. It talks about how the brutal and unrelenting force of artillery and death can cause a person to go crazy, and how they go down this spiral, down and down and down. It feels like they don't have control of their life, that it's meaningless at times. They keep coming back to those dreaded moments where they were helpless. They were fodder, pawns being used by the higher-ups who just want to push their own agenda. In their eyes, you're just another number, just another possible casualty on the report. So yeah, that's cool. Next, let's just say Sabaton isn't known for their in-depth lyrics. There are some good verses that are cool as hell, like in The Defense of Moscow, and others that are not as good, like Steel Commanders. Don't get me wrong, these are both great songs, but in my opinion, the actual words being said are more hard-hitting in one than the other. One thing that is consistent though, and I praise the lead singer Joachim for this, is the lyrics' energy. I mean, this is why it's called power metal. Despite some verses sounding like a 12-year-old tank enthusiast who doesn't actually know shit wrote them, it still has a great voice behind it, driving what the song is really about through the tone and the energy Joachim brings. Can I also say that he is one of the only lead singers I can think of that keeps his accent while singing? The list consists of him, the lead singer of the Cranberries, whose name I can't pronounce, and every AI-generated country music demonic entity from the pits of hell.
And they should stay there rotting in their own shit, abandoned and sad, with Satan tripping them and spitting on their asses every time they fall over.
Can you tell I hate the idea of AI-generated music? But for real though, his voice is genuinely so interesting to me, and with his iconic look, from my point of view, makes him the most recognizable singer ever. Like, ever. So good job, Joachim, for bringing something that everyone needs to hear in their lives. And I'm not talking about the overinflated condoms or the closeted foot fetish. Thanks for being a cool and funny dude. Of course, there are many other praises I have for this band. However, I don't want this video to be like over 25 minutes long. So yeah, I'm lazy as fuck, that's why. Alright, now that I have talked about the main things that I like, let's talk about the things that I'm a bit less adamant about. Of course, these are very minor gripes that have to do with the impact of the music more or less than the music itself. And there's only one really big thing I hate, and it's a bit unavoidable, but it's still there. So what's the thing I dislike? How Sabaton glorifies war. Though it's most likely unintentionally, it's still there, being, like I said, unavoidable. It's pretty hard not to make songs about war that don't make it sound like a noble conquest when your genre of music is literally called power metal, but again, the fact that it's there is still a bit of a problem. This is hard for other pieces of war media too, as none of the movies or TV shows can really encapsulate what a soldier goes through. I mean, in the case of something like 2019's All Quiet on the Western Front, based off of the novel of the same name, it had to only describe the important events of the Great War because, well, 90% of it was just waiting. Of course, it's painted as a constant onslaught of artillery and whatnot, which it was, don't get me wrong, but the way media portrays this aspect of war is very over-dramatized. In fact, there are some aspects in the life of World War I trenches that a lot of movies outright fail to mention. According to the Canadian War Museum's website, for example, soldiers rotated into and out of the front lines to provide a break from the stress of combat. They spent 4 to 6 days in the front trenches before moving back and spending an equal number of days in the secondary and finally the reserve trenches. This system of rotation, along with the occasional leave to England, prevented many soldiers from breaking down. Now, I don't know if my ears are deceiving me or not, but I have never heard this fact in almost any mainstream fictionalized or non-fiction adaptation. This, of course, is hard to depict, as if they also filmed about all the time the soldiers didn't spend fighting in a movie, for example, then the movie would just not be exciting. It's actually one aspect of the book, All Quiet on the Western Front, that I absolutely love, and it is told as a diary from the view of the main character, Paul. So it of course mentions the waiting time and all the things that don't have to do with the fighting, as this was the time he uses to write down these experiences. This again is extremely hard to adapt into a movie like it was done with this specific book 3 separate times, and while I think that the movies are extremely good on their own, they can't live up to the first person point of view of the book, where the main character can describe in more detail his exact feelings and thoughts on matters. You don't feel the same connection as you do with Paul in his own written account. Of course, this goes for other aspects of war as well, especially when it comes to the real traumatic experience of being thrown into a suicidal charge to take over an enemy trench, for example. In the end, you're not in danger yourself while watching a movie or reading a book, meaning to really encapsulate what that means you must get shot at yourself to understand the character's feelings. I just imagine a world where this is commonplace, and instead of watching the actual movie, half the time the audience at a theater needs to duck behind the seats. Then every once in a while someone will peek over to see if the fighting scene is over and get their head blown off by a sniper hidden behind the movie screen. Now that's a 4D experience. And also that will be really hard to visualize in the video, so good job for doing that, editing me. Anyway, back to the main point. There are a few songs from Sabaton that definitely exacerbate this point. One good example is the song The Unkillable Soldier, which is literally about a dude who gets shot a gazillion times during World War I, losing an arm and a fucking eye, and later said, quote, "Frankly, I enjoyed the war." Like, I just imagine this English dude meeting the Black Knight from the Holy Grail, going, "Odd bloke, ain't that Black Knight fellow?" and then proceeding to fight with him, both losing all their limbs in the process, then having enough energy to have tea time with them. Anyway, while this story is epic and deserves to be told, it still reflects an old way of thinking that is not necessarily the safest way of thinking with modern weapons and all. Please don't be that naive. You most likely don't have the shitty power fantasy anime levels of plot armor that this dude had. To counter this, however, I do think Sabaton tries to balance it out with some songs about some very disturbing and dark things from history. One example is To Hell and Back I mentioned earlier, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. You got songs like The Father and The Final Solution that will fill you with an immense amount of dread when doing research on the historical backgrounds of the songs. Despite the disturbing nature of these songs, I respect Sabaton for making the songs about these things, as even more than the last example, These stories should be taught and told so that we can learn from our past mistakes and move on from it and learn from those events to make sure we don't make those same mistakes again. Anyway, now that we're done with all the boring stuff, I get to throw my own suggestions in about what historical events they should make songs about. For one, they've been doing a lot of World War I and World War II crap lately, and it's like over 50% of their material. Granted, they are the two biggest and some of the most documented wars in all of human history, but a lot of the stuff not relating to them is still about stuff that happened in the past 300 to 400 years. Of course, they've done older stories in the past, but I've never seen anything about the Roman Empire. Like, what the hell, man? They're probably the most important and influential state in the modern Western world, despite being over 2,000 years old. So why no songs about them? I would also absolutely love to see something relating to the ancient Chinese or Japanese histories, as if you could tell from my previous video, I'm a bit of a fanatic for feudal East Asia. Oh, and now some genuine advice. I saw that Sabaton was asking their audience if they should do some fantasy content, and their fans in response went like,
No, bad Sabaton. Don't eat any of Windrose's food. Bad boy, bad boy.
That was an over-exaggerated recalling of events, but it sums it up. If you want to do something fantasy related while still being in the history genre, how about a song about J.R.R.R.R.R. Tolkien's time serving in the First World War and how that helped shape the world of the Lord of the Rings? That would be like really cool, just saying. All in all, Sabaton is definitely a band, definitely Swedish, and definitely fills its own history niche very well. The only way they could get even more Swedish and even cooler is by making a song about the history of Minecraft or something. I'm not even kidding. I want to hear an officially licensed Minecraft metal song by one of my favorite bands of all time. So if you see this Joachim, Throbe, or any other band member, then just know at least one of your fans isn't a wereaboo or commie-boo and actually likes having some fun. Anyway, I need to go because my mom wants me to drive my family to Ikea, where we will relentlessly tease my little brother for that one time he tried to eat a Swedish fish off the floor near a kitchen display as a 3-year-old. See y'all!